Old Hill Cemetery in Newburyport, Massachusetts. Why are there? Why is Old Hill Cemetery such a common thing? Do you know?
I have no
Is
idea.
it more just
There's
if
so
it's
many of
on
them.
an old hill, they're like, oh, I've got a clever name for this cemetery,
Yeah,
Old Hill Cemetery,
there's
because
like a
it's an
dozen of
old
them.
hill. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyways, the only thing I have like that I was gonna talk about was the Pierce Tomb at Old Hill Cemetery. It's
yeah,
pretty cool. It's pretty fucked up.
yeah. We can get into it.
So the cemetery was established in 1729, which is always cool because you get old cemeteries
Really,
around.
I read it was established in 1677.
Then
Huh.
my article could have been wrong.
Either way, one of those.
One of those,
Yeah.
anyways. It's old,
Yep.
old as fuck.
Hmm.
And when we were walking around, there was like an array of headstones and tombs. There's quite a few tombs there.
You know what was interesting about this one too? Like compared to all the other like colonial cemeteries we've been to,
Hmm.
this one was so unorganized.
So unorganized
Like
and so big.
so many of the headstones were just like crammed in like
Hmm.
super crowded areas.
I
It
had
was
to accept
interesting.
I was probably walking over people.
Yeah.
Ugh. Anyways, yeah, the tombs are pretty creepy looking. Uh, they're pretty creepy looking. We got to see some close, and I don't know, bad vibes
Yeah, there was that
for
one that
me.
was like it had a hole dug
Yeah,
into the side and you could look down into it.
yeah,
It was one of those like crypt ones
yeah.
where it
There's
looks like a coffin on the top, but really it's just covering like a hole in the ground where they have like multiple bodies. But yeah, very creepy.
But it said only the bravest souls will want to visit Old Hill Burying Ground in Newburyport after dark.
Mm.
Dun dun dun. And it's mostly because of the Pierce family too. Uh, the above ground crypt has the inscription 1863 Pierce. 7 members of the Pierce family have been laid to rest there. 1 drowned, 3 died of tuberculosis, and 1 was a Civil War veteran. And it didn't really say the others, it just spoke of those 5. And, they say laid to rest there, but for over 100 years, it's the cemetery is haunted by the Pierce family, and with good reason. In 1925, teenage boys dug their way into the crypt and unclothed the mummified corpses inside. They propped the bodies up as if they were having dinner, and then the boys danced around in the graveyard wearing the moldering clothes of the deceased. They were caught by the police. But in 1984, another group of teens found their way into the tomb and reportedly drank beer with the corpses, poured alcohol down their throats, and performed other darker deeds. And I'm glad that's all the article said because I don't want to know.
Yeah.
And then again in 2005, a man performing community service broke into the tomb, severed the head of one of the skeletons, and danced around the cemetery with it.
I remember when the 2005 one happened because it was all over like the
Yeah.
local news. And it was like people were just so freaked out because apparently he took the head home
Ugh.
and he like had the head and it was somebody he showed it to somebody and somebody's like, yo, this guy got a human head somewhere, like we gotta go see what his
Yeah.
fucking deal is. Yeah.
Well, it says all those people were caught and punished. But despite that, locals have spoken about hearing strange sounds, angry screams, and visions in the graveyard.
Oh, talking about the getting caught and punished, did you read anything on the 1984 one, how
Mm-mm.
they caught those kids?
No,
That was actually pretty funny.
it
So
didn't say.
as you said at the beginning, I've read a lot on this one as well, just because I'm interested with Pierce family tomb, just because it makes me wonder what's drawing people to it, because there's crypts all over the place here in New
That
England.
one's pretty, stands out,
Yeah, it
though.
does stand out, and that could be it. But
And it's said to be a crypt where the other tombs aren't necessarily said to be a crypt.
true, yeah, it's the above ground crypt. But in 1984, as you mentioned at the beginning, 3 of those family members died of tuberculosis.
Mm-hmm.
Now, tuberculosis, it dies off after a while, but not everybody knows that. So the police put in the newspaper, because they knew somebody broke into it, that if you touch those bodies, you were going to get tuberculosis because they died of tuberculosis. And then the people that did it got freaked out and had to go to the hospital to get checked for tuberculosis. And then the doctors are
That's
just like,
clever.
the police just told the doctors, like, be on the lookout for anyone coming in wanting to get tested for tuberculosis.
Well, what's crazy too is your parents are around that area, so they probably remember the
The
84.
1984 one, yeah, probably.
Like just because that's not that old.
Yeah, I think it's
But yeah.
pretty funny that they were like, I bet we could, because they probably assumed it was teenagers, and they were like, oh, we can trick these dudes, and they did.
I just don't understand like what appeals people to break into. Like I've definitely gone into haunted places, or like places after hours, but never to like
Yeah.
desecrate.
Well,
Like,
that's the interesting thing about the Pierce tomb is
mhm,
it makes you wonder if there's some kind of like
pull.
force that's like pulling people to do
Yeah.
that, because it's they're always getting desecrated.
And I was looking through the history, and there was no other
Yeah.
like tombs that had been like desecrated to that sense. Maybe some vandalism here and there,
Yeah.
but like nothing to the sense of what's gone on with the Pierce family crypt.
There's a lot of homeless dudes that live in this cemetery too. Like when we were visiting the other day, we saw like a little area where like a homeless guy had obviously been sleeping. But I remember when I was a kid too, we would right next to the cemetery there's that pond. We would go ice skating there in the winter. And I remember there was one winter I was there and there was like a homeless guy who came out of the cemetery at night, and it was really creepy. And we were all
That'd be
like, "Oh, what the
creepy.
heck?" But again, whether it's the homeless people or the vandals, it makes me wonder what draws people into
Yeah,
that cemetery. But
that's crazy. But it's said that there's been even like paranormal investigators have gone to that cemetery,
yeah,
and they've reported witnessing apparitions, shadow figures that disappear into the darkness, along with a strange presence of being watched by unseen entities. And then others reported scratching sounds from inside the tomb and pale figures darting between the headstones.
ooh, that's creepy.
Yeah, scratching sounds. Ugh. But like a critter could get under there,
Yeah,
could probably make that one more logic. But it's actually Old Hill Cemetery is actually considered one of the top 3 haunted places in Newburyport,
hmm.
according to a couple articles. The first being Maudsley State Park, which we've gone
Which we've
over,
covered. Yeah.
and the second one is Newburyport High School.
Wow.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah. I mean, the high school does look wild if
Oh,
you drive by it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
It's an old, like,
yeah.
very architecturally pleasing building.
And then number 3 is this Old Hill Cemetery, mostly because of the Pierce tomb. I like to look
Yeah.
at Google reviews and see, because like Google reviews for Maudsley State Park were great because they had like their own paranormal experiences listed, and there none for Old Hill Cemetery.
No.
There were barely any reviews at all, so it makes me wonder if like someone's moderating them, because that would deter people too,
Yeah. And especially
like
where
to.
it's unlike other cemeteries there, they have a
Mhm.
problem with people going there and like causing trouble. So
Yeah,
maybe they
yeah.
do try to deter people from going to it. So I researched a very notable guy that's buried at this cemetery. There's all kinds of like interesting people. There's a lot of like Revolutionary War heroes and like
Hmm.
captains and soldiers buried there. But this one guy, he's an American businessman named Lord Timothy Dexter. And he was known for being really eccentric and having just like quirky, weird behavior.
Was he the
And
sympathizer too?
no,
Oh, he was.
no, he was not. So Lord Timothy Dexter he was born in Marblehead, Mass, and he was uneducated, couldn't really read or write, was really weird, really quirky, and he tried to get into politics, but nobody would take him seriously because he was just a goofball.
Like kind of like that guy that wears the boot on his head
Yeah,
today. What
yeah.
is his name?
Oh, Vermin Supreme. Yeah, that guy rules, dude. But so Lord Timothy Dexter was just like, he was this weird, quirky dude right around the time of the Revolution. This is like, he was, his heyday was like right around 1770s. And the story of him is really interesting because he bought a bunch of money right at the start of the Civil War. Like, he bought up all of the colonial money because it became worthless at the start of the Civil War because everybody thought that England was going to win. So he
The
bought up.
Revolutionary War.
Oh, yes,
You
Revolutionary
keep
War.
saying so. I'm like, you just jumped.
Yeah, Revolutionary War, not Civil War. But yeah, so at the beginning of the Revolutionary War, people thought that the British were going to win, so the colonial money just plummeted and it was worthless. Lord Timothy Dexter bought up all of the worthless money and held on to it. A few years later, the revolution pans out, the money appreciates, and now he's rich. So then he used that money and bought 2 merchant ships so he could start trading. Because, yeah, at the time, Newburyport was, obviously, it's a port city. That was the best way to make money. Again, he's this weird, quirky, like,
uneducated
dude. So all of the other, like, competing merchants and businessmen were like, we can get rid of this guy. So they would try to, like, set him up with, like, bad deals or, like, convince him to do dumb stuff to try to bankrupt him. But every time they tried to do that, he just came out on top. Like, it was actually, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, like this guy should have been playing the lottery.
Yeah, he just
with
got,
his
like,
luck.
some of it was his own. He wasn't a fool by, like, obviously he was uneducated, but he was smart.
Yeah.
Because there are some cases in, like, these that I'm going to go through where he did just get lucky. But then there's other ones where it was, like, his own actual business sense that got him through it.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the first things they did to him was they convinced him to buy a bunch of bed warmers. And these bed warmers back then, they were like these metal pans that you'd put hot coals in, and you'd put them under your bed, and it would warm your bed in the winter. So they convinced him to try to go sell a bunch of those in the West Indies, which is like a tropical climate. So he, buys a bunch of them. They were real cheap, and he brought them down there. But when he got down there, he rebranded them as ladles. And in the West Indies, there was a huge molasses like industry. Sold all his bed warmers, made the money, came back. So then again, everyone was like, "Oh, he just got lucky." Blah blah blah. They tried to do it to him again, and they told him to bring a shipment of coal to Newcastle, England. Newcastle, England was a coal mining town.
Mm-hmm.
So they were like, he's not going to sell his coal there. Like, they're going to be like, he's not going to make money on that. Because the whole thing is they were trying to get him to lose money.
Yes, go bankrupt.
So he goes to Newcastle, England, and he just happens to pull into port like 2 weeks into a coal miner strike. And they were all out of coal. They needed coal, sold his whole boat, came out on top again, and then came back. Again, a third one is bought up a bunch of wool clothes, wool hats, wool mittens, went back down to the Caribbean again. Everyone's like, he's not going to sell that down there. He didn't sell it to the people. He sold it to the other merchants that were coming from like Siberia and Manchuria, China.
Oh, nice. That was smart.
Yeah, because they had emptied their boats down there. Yeah. So he was like, hey, you want to bring this back up? And so then they were like, yeah. So he sold all that to them, and then they brought it back up to Siberia. Came out on top again. Now, one of his final ones that he did, which is easily my favorite business venture of his, was he rounded up all the stray cats and literally just got a literal boatload of cats. And he brought them to the Caribbean, and he brought them to islands that had rodent problems. And he sold all the stray cats. So the city loved him because he got rid of all the stray cats, and he made a bunch of money bringing them to like people that needed them. And then that was just his business, like, success. His eccentric and quirky behavior, too, that he did a lot of weird shit that, like, just made him well-known. He, during, like, the peak of his fame, he faked his own death, and then he showed up at his funeral and just bullied and made fun of everybody who was mourning him. He would oftentimes tell people that his wife was dead and that he was a single available man. And when his wife would be like right there with him, like hearing him, and he would tell people that she was just a ghost.
What did his wife do?
I have no idea. This dude was crazy. He wrote a book called A Pickle for the Knowing Ones. That's what the title was. And apparently I haven't read it, but apparently it's just incomprehensible and riddled with spelling mistakes. Like, you can't make any sense of it because he was uneducated. He couldn't read or write, but he wrote a book.
Makes me want to read it.
I know. I want to find it now. But yeah, then eventually he just ended up dying like a wealthy businessman. He had this sick house with all of these wild statues of like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington.
That's cool.
Keep in mind, these guys are alive at this time too. So that would
Yeah,
be
so
like that would be somebody today like having a statue of Elon Musk at their house. Like he just
oh,
had
you don't think someone does? I
yeah.
guarantee someone probably
Yeah,
does.
this guy just balled out on like the coolest shit and then he died. But yeah, reading his story, I'm like, this guy rules. Like, thinking of some of the stuff too, imagine the conversation he had to have with like his workers on the cat thing. Just being like, listen, guys, get some nets. You gotta go catch all these cats. And then his workers just being like, fuck, all right, catch the cats.
That's great.
But yeah, that's Lord Timothy Dexter, and he's buried right there at Old Hill Cemetery.
Huh? That a wealthy, old, rich, crazy man.
Yep.
That's crazy.
He just couldn't lose.
Just couldn't lose. I know. Should have put money into gambling. He probably would have been lucky.
I mean, he basically did. That's what he did, like buying all that worthless money. I mean, he was gambling that it was gonna be better one day, and he won.
Yeah.
You know. Well, I think that's it for Old Hill.